Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Hey there, everybody. I am so delighted to be back today, and we're going to have a really cool conversation about empaths and intuition, and maybe even talking a little bit about how flowers can give us messages and hints about what we need to know from the universe. So today, my guest is Susan Jane. And Susan has spent over 30 years encouraging people to connect, develop, and trust their intuition to enable them to make confident decisions in their lives. But her life wasn't that simple. It changed dramatically when her 20-year emotionally abusive marriage ended. Susan had to reconnect and discover who she really was and what she wanted to do with her life. But it's hard to make decisions when for most of your life, other people have made them for you. There was only one choice to be made. Susan had to trust who she was deep down and confidently follow the intuitive decisions she was receiving. It wasn't easy at first, but it got clearer with practice. Susan's strength lies within as she relies strongly on her intuition to guide her towards her goals in life. She has learned to trust this power and teach others to do the same using the tools she has developed over her lifetime. The most enjoyable tool for intuitive guidance comes through intuitive flower readings. In flowers, you will actually see the intuitive messages from your soul. The petals of attraction, your guides along the way, will even discover how to motivate yourself to achieve your goal. A beautiful way to learn to trust your intuition and make confident life decisions. Enjoy your life's journey by trusting in the guidance of your intuitive self. Welcome, Susan. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. And I loved how you read that. I sound really, really good, don't I?
You do. And it also is like, and it sounds like you really have an interesting story to share with us. And so what I always love to do is I love to start at the very beginning and talking about what your experience was like as a sensitive child, as an intuitive person. Like, what was it like? Did you identify as highly sensitive and empathic? What kind of experience did you have as a kid? Did you have people telling you that you were too sensitive, that you were too, you were making things up? Like, what was your experience like?
Well, growing up, I was one of 8 children. So, yeah, Jennifer's going, wow.
Yes, I just made a face and went, wow. Yeah. 8 children is a lot of people.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Being one of 8, I can't say I identified with anything. I identified as one of 8. And so you went along doing what you did in how you did it. So you survived the way you survived. I didn't feel that I was any different to anyone else, but I wasn't aware that I could be any different to anyone else. I know I was a lot quieter than some of my siblings, but I did keep to myself. I enjoyed having my time, my space. As much as I enjoyed being with the family and interacting with the family, I enjoyed having my time and my space. And I guess when I look back, I can look back and say, oh, you were like this and you were like that. But when I was going through it, I didn't realize,
right.
I was not aware of being an empath. I wasn't aware that I could feel my brothers and sisters' emotions. I wasn't aware that I could pick up on those feelings. That was just what you did.
Right, right.
It's not until later on when you look back that you realize it.
Yes. Well, and I'm curious, where were you in the birth order in a family of 8?
There was 4 of us born in England. I was the last born in England. Mum was 6 months pregnant when she came to Australia, and then she had another 4. So of the 8, I was.
So you were a middle. You were really like smack dab in the middle. So, which I mean, middle child seems like there's a whole other kind of pieces about what it's like to be sort of sandwiched between the older and the younger ones. And like really, and I think just that idea of you already came in with a whole bunch of siblings and then a whole bunch of other siblings came in after you. It makes total sense that you were just kind of like going along to get along.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is later on in our lives, my younger sister, the next one down, she would often talk about middle child and this was the issue and she was having problems here. I never ever saw it as being a problem or an issue. I never felt that I was alienated in any way or not part of the family in any way. I never felt different. I did understand that with 8 kids, you only had a little bit of time, of mum's time.
Yeah.
I was very aware that my oldest sister was not, I don't know whether you would say mum's favourite, but they seemed to interact a lot better. And so there was a lot of competition in the family and I wasn't really prepared to take on that competition. So I found my own space and my own reality wherever I was. But yes, I probably was. If you ask my sisters and brothers, yeah, I was probably the weird one. Out of all the family, all of my 7 brothers and sisters still live in and around Melbourne where the mum and dad are, or mum only passed just recently. I'm the only one. When I was 21, I left and moved 2 states away.
Wow.
So that was probably the biggest difference between me and my family. And like I said, I can look back now, but obviously there was a reason I needed to get away from the family because I didn't feel like I could be me while I was amongst it.
Yes. Well, and you were saying like your experience being in your family, it was almost like it was so immersive that there wasn't even an opportunity to sort of be like, who am I? What am I? What's mine? What's not mine? Like you were just kind of part of this. I don't know. It's almost like it seems like a herd or like a colony where
yes.
there was all this momentum within the family. I love how you were talking about sort of being a middle child. You didn't have some of that middle child angst. I always think of like, I don't know if you ever watched the Brady Bunch and like Jan Brady and the whole Marsha, that sort of, and it sounds like your younger sister had more of that Marsha kind of thing going on. But for you had that perspective. Do you think that you had almost like the perspective of sort of an old soul around your family, like you kind of got it?
I do. But I feel that you're probably talking me up a little bit more than what really happened. Because yes, I did feel like I was a little bit different or a little bit old soul like, but my way of surviving or my way of living in that when I was in those teens and those younger years was to go with the herd mentality. It was easier to flow than to create any drama. So where you're saying that maybe that is an old soul having that understanding that that's a better way to get through this situation, or whether it's just somebody who's going, I don't want to push any buttons. I'm quite happy to just go with the flow.
Right. Well,
so,
and as an empath, there's that way in which you can feel the flow and sort of calibrate to it as opposed to constantly pushing up against it and trying to work away from it. So let's talk about the 20-year marriage. Let's talk about, and I guess I might be jumping ahead. So if I am, stop me and we'll back up. But actually I'll ask you this. Did you go from leaving your family and moving 3 states away to being married, or was there an in-between of sort of finding yourself or like having some discoveries or anything? Like what happened once you left your family?
I had a few discoveries before I left my family, and I'll talk about those a bit later.
Yeah.
But I had a few discoveries then, and I wasn't aware that they were discoveries, mind you. Again, not being aware until you've looked back.
Yes.
So I know I got to around the 20-year mark, and I went, I want to travel around Australia. I want to see the world, and I've just really had this strong urge. The only way I can find me is to be away from that, because the family, and don't get me wrong, I love my family, but they put you into boxes. They put you into their little packages because it's easy for them. And I get that. I've done the same to them, but I needed to get away from that so I could find myself. And I was acutely aware of that. So I left. I did a bit of a holiday with a friend, and then she went back to Melbourne, and I stayed up in Queensland and started working and started getting money in and finding myself. I did meet my husband earlier in that trip, probably way too early. I had obviously not found myself properly. I've only found parts of myself. And yes, I did marry. I guess if I look back on it, I married my father.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I married, and I was, again, not aware of that until a long time ahead. Yes.
So often we're not. And yet it's so fascinating how we will just repeat the patterns until we learn from them. I also want to just hold up a piece where you were talking about you had to, in order to find yourself, you had to get away. And I think that that's so true with empathic overwhelm is sometimes the only way we actually can start to recognize what's ours, what's not ours, who are we actually, as opposed to who are we being influenced to be. Only comes from silence, only comes from getting away from the static and away from the noise and being able to actually be like, oh, this is what I am. This is who I am. This is what matters to me. I know for myself, it took me years of being sort of out of my mother's scope of influence before I really started recognizing how much of the stuff, how much of things that I thought were mine were actually hers. And so I really do think that there's times where the only way we really get to find out who we are is by taking space from the louder noise.
Yeah. And I like how you called it the scope of it. I probably called it the influence, the expectation. So we had the family have an expectation of you. And they may not even have that expectation. It might be, I feel that they've got an expectation. And so we start to live our lives around the expectation of others, which may not, or perceived expectation.
Right. Well, and I mean, the combination of the spoken and sometimes unspoken, and then also the projected or imagined expectations, you've got this whole cluster of things. And then on top of it, there's the repeating the same patterns or the same lessons until we learn them. So like you meet a man, he's just like your father. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, yes, I met him early on, and to be honest, when you're going through that stage, I'd left my family a couple of states away to meet up with somebody who gave you that feeling of security or knowing, and like you live in these constants that it might be a quagmire of stuff and nonsense, but that stuff and nonsense. And when you start looking at what's over the other side of the fence, you don't know, you can't see it. So you tend to stay in that quagmire. And I think meeting him and having that understanding of what was going on there, it gave me some sort of sense of a crazy sense. I don't know how I got there, but of security.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also imagining, if this is your first time away from this chaotic, you were in a family, I'm assuming that it was just your parents and your siblings. There's 10 of you there. If you had grandparents, it could have been, but you've got 10, you've got this nuclear family of 10. I can even imagine just what it must have been like to meet this man who, we don't know. We're not immediately going to be like, oh my God, you're my father. We don't necessarily recognize that at all. But I'm also imagining that unless he happened to already have 9 or he had 8 children, the amount of space in that relationship, the fact that you got to be in the beginning, he was probably you both could create or make each other the priority. That was, you got attention in a way that you probably were not getting it before. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm sort of imagining this, But a lot of times when you have somebody who's really controlling and, somebody who's kind of abusive and controlling before they, sort of turn to the dark side, they are sometimes the most charming people when it comes to courtship that you're ever going to experience. Like they know how to love bomb and really bring you in. So I'm sort of imagining that the beginning, I mean, it's not like it was awful at the start.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely not. And I think that's why you question yourself, because it seems to turn in such a slow and obnoxious sort of a way that you really aren't aware of what's going on. When, once the lust and the excitement and everything else starts to wear down and the reality starts to hit home, that's when things start to come on. And they talk about the 7-year itch, and often it is about that space of time when you start to go, you know what, things aren't really what I expected them. And we often go through, okay, well, things aren't going too well a couple of years in, so let's have a baby. Oh, things go great for a little while. Then they hit bomb again, and then you go, oh, well, let's have another baby and see if that helps.
Yeah.
And we're doing all these things without realizing what we're doing. And because you're caught up in the moment, you're there and you're letting it happen. Again, looking back, when we start to reflect back on our lives, you say, what the hell? What was I thinking? What was I doing? But you're surviving, and you're surviving the best.
Exactly. I had a business partner for many years who always would say, there you go, using the T word. And it's one of my favorite sayings, because it's sort of like when we say, what was I thinking? And he'd always go, there you go, using the T word. Like thinking has nothing to do with it. And I think, you were talking about how the early part of your life, you just were going along to get along. You were moving with the flow. You were sort of not necessarily recognizing yourself or really spending time, like just sort of dialing into like, who am I? What's making me tick? And so, of course, like, and we're talking, I mean, you were saying you were in the marriage for 20 years. I imagine you've been out of the marriage for a while. So we're talking like what? Like 30 years ago when you met him, 25 years ago when you met him, or?
Oh, longer. It would have been, I've been away from him now more than I was with him.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So then we're talking like, if we're talking like more than 40 years ago when you first met him, it's not like anybody was looking at domestic violence back then in the same way they are now. There was not the same level of self-awareness or like red flags or warning signs or anything. And I'm imagining the social pressure to be married and have kids in Australia is comparable to it is here in the United States.
And you don't separate, you don't get divorces, you don't do this.
So you were doing all the things. You were doing everything that was expected of you. Yeah.
And as I've gone along then, it got to the stage where I was in tears a lot. I'd had 3 children in 3 years.
3 children in 3 years.
Then I worked out what was causing it and I stopped. So I worked
out what was causing it and I stopped. I'm like, did you, that just like, was there something like that was making you extra fertile, or was it like that you were just like, you guys weren't using birth control? Like,
I was not very good at birth control. I'm not a good tablet taker. So taking the pill every day was not, I'd get to the end of the month and think, I've got 6 pills left. What's going on? So I was hopeless at that. And then I put my hand up. But in the same token, he'd already had a family, but he wouldn't go and get himself sorted. So it was, that's men don't do that. It's women have to do that. So, and this was the mentality. So with my situation, I'll go back to that abusive side to it. So I always sort of went, why I thought I was going a little bit crazy was my ex never hit me. Basically, he did once, sorry, I should say. Once he did, he raised his hand at me. And I think that's all I needed, being an empath as well. We don't need to be knocked around too much because we learn very quickly. So I learned very quickly not to push those buttons again.
Yes.
Now, he was distraught and was very, very apologetic for doing that and all the rest of it. But I'd lost that trust. The trust had gone. I could not trust him any longer for me to stand up and say what I wanted to say without the consequences of it. So that was my very first learning with that one.
Yes.
And again, for the rest of that marriage, he never raised a hand at me, but he didn't need to. I didn't give him cause to as well, if that makes sense.
It totally sense. It's sort of Stockholm syndrome. It's that idea of that there is that way in which we get trained how to behave. And I mean, sometimes certainly there are relationships, and I just want to say this because I don't want to imply that our behavior necessarily has anything to do with why somebody is being abusive. Like
Absolutely.
There are people who will just beat the crap out of somebody simply because they're there and they're breathing. But obviously in this particular case, this was somebody who fortunately you could sense you had that ability to sense things, and for it to not have to go into the physical, escalate into physical violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the same token, Jen, that because it had happened, I was on tenterhooks a lot of the times, working on eggshells, making sure it didn't happen because I basically blamed myself for it.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, I can't do that. I can't say how I'm feeling. I can't say I don't like how you do that. I can't really be me.
Yeah.
That's sort of where it happened. And so this is where this emotional abuse comes through. Now, one of the other aspects when I looked at all this is in Australia, we have the three pillars of abuse. We have physical abuse, we have financial abuse, and we have psychological abuse. Now, all of them will create emotional aspects to them.
Yes.
But I always say there is the fourth pillar, which is emotional abuse.
Yes.
And it doesn't come under some of those. And one of the cases I've sort of spoken about was a situation in Melbourne where the gentleman had his three kids for the weekend custody, and he drove his car into it was a dam or some sort of water course and drowned the three children. Now, that's not physical abuse.
No.
He did not hurt her. It's not financial abuse. There was no finances involved.
Right.
And there was not psychological abuse in the fact that he didn't use words to upset her. Yeah. It was total emotional manipulation, emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
He used that to get what he wanted out of her.
Yes.
And this was the sort of thing that, there's areas where one of the other aspects of a narcissist is they'll take you away from your family. They'll take you away from your safety net. They become your safety net.
Yes.
And because I was living 2 states away, he would control my friends and he would control that safety. And that to me was emotional abuse. He would say things like, oh, you don't want to be friends with them. They're this, they're that. And you sort of go, oh, don't I? And you double take on everything. Right. Everything you did was questioned. If it wasn't questioned by them, it was questioned by yourself.
Exactly. And the relationship to this way of being constantly gaslit, of being constantly invalidated, of being of having somebody just kind of always kind of nudging you to follow, it just sort of like you're constantly being nudged onto their track instead of your own. The relationship between that and intuition, how do you even access your intuition where you've got somebody you might be like, wow, that person seems like a wonderful person to meet or to connect with. Yeah. I'd love to be friends with them. And then immediately you get that course correction or that sort of knock upside the head, sort of cosmic bitch slap of no, that's not okay. So yeah. I'm just really struck by how much being in a relationship with a narcissistic person, being in a relationship with somebody who is emotionally abusive does and can really impact your sense of not just your intuition, but even the fundamentals of what do I even want? What do I desire? What makes me happy? What brings me joy?
Yeah. The sense of worth. Yeah, absolutely. So as I went along, I was in tears a lot because, like I said, I've had 3 children in 3 years, and I was in tears a lot. And everybody in this small seaside community was sort of, well, not everybody, but, people that I knew, well, she's got postnatal depression. There's something wrong with her. She's got postnatal depression. So everyone was basically telling me this, and I'm thinking, well, I don't feel like I've got a problem. And I'm one of the first ones to go, if I've got a problem, I need to look at that. How do I do that? But I didn't feel like I had a problem, and yet I was in tears a lot. So one particular morning, I was driven into town, which was like over an hour's drive, driven into town, and I was dropped outside the doctor's surgery, baby in arm, and was told to get something. Now, as I said to you, I'm not good with tablets. I'm not good with that. And at that stage, Valium was the drug of choice for housewives at that particular time. And he just basically shoved me in, and I thought, I haven't got a doctor's appointment. I got nothing. And this is where synchronicity, intuition starts. Anyway, so I fronted up going, that's what I've got to do. I've got to see the doctor. And the lady behind the desk said, what for? And I went, well, I don't know. I've just been told I've got to see the doctor. I really didn't know. I just could not make up. I couldn't understand it. So this particular day, they had a new doctor arrive in town. She was new to the area. She practiced alternate therapies, which was fine, and she had a space. So I basically went into the doctor's, and I'm in there and blubbering. She's saying, what's wrong? I don't know. And I'm blubbering. I don't know what to do, and rah, rah, rah. So she's asking me a series of questions. And as she's asking these questions, she's writing notes down. Anyway, at the end, she looked at me, and I told her I didn't like taking tablets. And, so she was actually listened. This doctor listened to me. And so in the end, she held up two pieces of paper. One was a prescription for Valium, and one was a list of books. And she said, you have the choice. You have the power to choose what you want to do with this. And it was such a small choice to make, but it was my first one I could make. I didn't make the choices for the other things. This was one I could make. And you've got to remember, I had an alcoholic, abusive husband, 3 kids in 3 years, 3 babies under the age of 4, basically, and I lived 2 states away from any family member.
Yeah.
So I grabbed what was easy for me. It had to be easy.
Yeah.
And I grabbed the list of books.
Which is so funny, because so many people would do the exact opposite, because they'd like, give me a pill. It's easier to take a pill than it is to do the work. And yet, because you are not inclined towards tablets, what an incredible blessing that you went for the books instead of the benzos. I mean,
but it didn't go down too well when I went back to the car, and he said, what did you get? And I went, a list of books. Didn't go down very well at all. But I got my first book, and it was called Creative Visualization by Jacques Diquan.
One of the OGs, one of my favorite books from those. Yeah. What a life-changing book it was for me. I love that was your first book.
Yeah, that was my very first. And the thing was that after I got that one, it was like, well, I can't afford to buy books all the time, because I had no money. In those days, the woman got no money. It all went to the husband, and he divvied it out how he chose.
Well, and as you said, financial abuse is one of the pillars of domestic violence or of abuse. Yeah.
So there was the other one. So it was like, okay, so how can I do this? And this is where my intuition starts. This is when, and I shouldn't say it starts to kick in. It's when I noticed it start to kick. And because how I talk about intuition is you ask, you receive, and you action. It's as simple as that. And so this is where I've gone, well, how can I get the books that I need? Nowadays we have podcasts. We have so much information on the internet, but in those days we didn't have that.
No, we had libraries with maybe a stack of books on metaphysics and self-help and stuff, if we were lucky.
That's exactly what I did. When I said, well, how can I do this? Then the intuition kicked in and said, what about the library? Go to the library. They're free.
Yeah. And
so every time I went into town, I would go in and I'd go to the library and I'd get 10 books, always self-help books, always, the spiritual books, always those, never went into the general reading, always went into that side of it. And I would just allow those words to hit me. That sounds good. I'll have that book. Those pictures, I like those colours, and I'd let my intuition pick and decide which ones I'd take home. Take them home. Sometimes they were good, sometimes they weren't. It didn't matter. I needed to read them and get an understanding. And that's how I started. So that's why anybody listening to this podcast, I take my hat off to you, because that is the best way to get going. Books, reading, getting other people's understanding of it is how I started to really connect with who I was and where I was going. So where he was dumping me in front of the doctor's surgery to get something to fix me, what he didn't realize, he did exactly that. The book did fix me, but not the way he wanted me to be fixed.
Right. He was your agent of change. Like, in some ways, he really was. He was a divine messenger in this particular case. It went against what his ego wanted, but it certainly sounds like it was the big shift. So what was it that made you go from that glimmer of possibility to, I'm done with this? This is it.
It was a long time, just like yours, Jen. It was a long period of time. One of the things that I always said, as far as a marriage goes, I needed to, you need, you want, and you love in a marriage. And I had to really assess them. That was my ticking box, if that makes sense. And when I sort of looked at that, and I might have got that from a book, I don't know, but I remember thinking, well, I love him and I do need him and I want him. So that was pretty cool. We eventually moved out to a 90-acre organic crop farm. I loved the farm. On there, I no longer wanted him. I noticed the want started to really dwindle, but I still needed him being on the farm and I still loved him. He's the father of my children, so I still loved him. And we're talking then 8 years later type thing, we sold the farm and moved back into town. And that's when I went, I no longer need him. We're in this little house. I no longer need him. So I've lost the want and I've lost the need. Do I still love him? And that sort of, straight away I went, oh, yeah, I do. And then, a year later, I asked the same question and it was like, well, hang on. If he stopped drinking, which is what I kept on thinking what the problem was, if he stopped drinking, and I've only known him to be like that all his life, or all our lives together, would I still love him? Is that what I want? And that's when I went, no. I loved him for how he was. If he changed, I don't know whether I could guarantee that. And I don't love how he is now. And one of the things he always said to me, well, it's your fault. You changed. And I went, yes, it is my fault. Yes, I did change. I don't believe that after being together for 20 years, you would be the same person.
No kidding.
Yeah. To me, after 20 years, if I hadn't changed, there would be something wrong with me.
Right. Well, and he changed too. He just doubled down. It sounds like he changed, but he was just kind of disintegrating into the alcoholism. And, I don't imagine he was as bad at the beginning of the relationship as towards the end of the relationship.
Yeah. And look, to be honest, I don't know whether he was bad or not so bad. The fact was I had changed.
Yeah.
And I had grown and I had developed and I had moved on. He decided not to. He wanted to stay where he was, and that was fine. And when he said, you've changed, I went, yes, I have.
Yeah.
Put my hand up to it. Yes, I have. And you know what? I am so bloody proud of myself that I have. And when I am getting rid of the stuff and the crap and the things that are around me that do not suit me any longer, I am more than proud to.
I love the fact, one of the things that I want to hold out in this is acknowledging the fact that it took time, that this was an incremental transition. That, I think so often when we're looking at abusive relationships and we're looking at marriages and domestic violence, there's this idea that I think a lot of people have where it's once you're in this abusive relationship, you're just supposed to exit it. And yet there's what I've seen over and over again for so many of us is that when it comes to a relationship, we have to do the things we need to do in order to be ready to walk away. And that there is it is an incremental process, that it is a growth process that happens. So, as you were saying, it's like, it starts with, you have you're young and married with 3, basically infant to toddler, and you find these books And then you spend 8 years engaging with these books and learning more about yourself and living on the organic farm for a while and realizing, wait a second, I don't want him anymore. Like, I have other things that are fulfilling me and satisfying to me. And then you leave there and come back into the city or back into the town or city. And you're like, I don't need him anymore. But it's not like this is a, one day just sort of the light dawns and everything is new. And you're just like, I'm going to pivot. It was a gradual, like, it's more like the way light really does dawn is like, it's not just like you go from night to day. Yes. You go through this process of the transition of the light coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing is, when you see people repeating the same patterns, that is because they haven't done the work to be able to move on. They've just, as you've said, they've just gone, oh, I don't like this, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And they've not actually had the understanding and the learnings and the way to move forward. You want to be able to move forward so you don't have to experience that again. You want to learn from that so you can move forward in a more positive and a better way. And it was amazing. Once the marriage finished, I had 10 years on my own, and I loved it. I loved it. Look, there was times when I got sad, and there was times when I got a bit lonely, and there was times when I needed to have a booty call, which we arranged that as well. But the reality is that I enjoyed my own company. I learned to enjoy who I was. I learned to understand who I was. I learned to get that back again. I remember after the marriage breakdown, my girlfriend came around and she said to me, come, Sue, let's go shopping. Let's go and buy you some clothes because you always wear crappy, shitty stuff because you've been told to. Let's go and buy some clothes. I'm in the clothes shop with her and she said to me, what do you like? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. I've only been able to buy what I can or pick up what I can.
Yes.
I don't know what I like. And the other aspect was, once the marriage broke down, was the decision making. We talked about that earlier on. I went through a stage because I had made the decision to buy him out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought him out. I had to make the decision to clean his stuff out. He refused to do anything. I had to move everything. I had to go through all of our stuff and emotionally detach myself from it. And it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But I recommend anyone do it because it is the best way to get through that grief and get through that understanding. And it's grieving the loss of a future is what we grieve, not the loss of a partner, the loss of a future.
Yes, you just said it, like mic drop here, because I have witnessed that. I have a dear friend who was in a marriage that was a good marriage. I mean, there were challenges with it, and a number of different reasons for this, but eventually the husband got to a place where he was done. And what I saw for this friend of mine was that it was not the past that she was grieving. It was all of the promises of what she imagined her life was going to be like, that suddenly the world, it was no longer going to be this way. And I think that that's actually, it's funny because I'm thinking about even some work I was doing earlier with another client about so often it's the fantasy of what we thought we would be living that we grieve for, as opposed to necessarily even something that actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what I was grieving. I was grieving the loss of a future that I perceived to be. But I remember I would go to the shops to do my grocery shopping and I could not make a decision, could not think of what I wanted for dinner. I reckon for 4 weeks, almost a full month, I had jam sandwiches for dinner because I could not get my head around it. And when we're going through these processes, you've got to be gentle with yourself. You've got to be kind with yourself. Allow that to happen. It's not hurting me to have a month of jam sandwiches. It really is not hurting me.
No.
If it's making my head and my emotions calm down and allow me to get through it, then so be it. And it got to the stage where I went, oh, okay, I might have a stir fry. And all of a sudden, things started to move and started to change. And I could then go shopping and I could see the week in front of me and I could pick out what I needed. But yeah, for a long time there, I could not make a decision. I had to make so many in such a short period of time, from doing none, not even being able to pick clothes, to having to do everything when I purchased the house from him. Yeah, it was huge. It was so overwhelming. And that's sort of how I coped. And that's when I started to, again, go back into the intuition. What does it feel like? What do I need to do? How can I get through this? And it was like, just eat jam sandwiches. Who gives a shit? Just eat it.
Right.
When you're ready to make that decision, when you're ready to go, then we'll go again. And I was like, oh, okay, jam sandwiches.
Well, and it strikes me that when we are getting out of a really challenging situation, there's a certain amount of decompression that needs to happen. And it's like your brain, you had been sort of, I don't know, like just kind of like the blinders on, going along, going with the flow. And it's almost like a month for your frontal cortex to come online and to just start saying, hey, I'd like something other than jam and bread.
Yeah.
Of course, you just needed to decompress for a while. And thank goodness for jam sandwiches, that you could just eat jam sandwiches and it wasn't that big a deal. Yeah.
And then I went to stir fries and I ate a lot of stir fries and then I started to ease it off. But that was just how I coped with it. That's how I did it. Yeah. There was a stage there. I had the 3 children when I was still living at the seaside village thing. I had done so much community work there. I was nominated for an award, which they call Australian Citizen of the Year. And it is a huge, big award. And it was like, because there was no internet, I didn't know what the award was. It didn't mean a lot to me. And my ex just sort of went, oh, it's just crap. It's just somebody trying to raise more money and trying to get money out of you. And I ignored it. Now, there's very, very few people that get nominated for that sort of an acclaim. And it wasn't until 20 years later that I went, holy shit, that's what I was nominated for. I did not know that. Yeah. And when I went to go to accept my nomination, they had this big dinner. And I didn't get the money in those days, so there was no money there. And I said to my husband, do you want to come to the dinner? I can collect my award. And that's when he just hoo-ha'd it and said it was a whole lot of rubbish. I'm not going. That's just fundraising. And I went, oh, okay. And I said, okay, well, if I get the kids babysat, will you babysit the kids so I can go? No, you get somebody else to babysit. Well, everybody was going to this event. I couldn't find a babysitter without having to pay one, and I didn't have the money to pay one. Mm-hmm. And then when I looked in my car the day before we were due to go, I had no petrol. I had no money to get petrol to go. Everything became so hard. Yeah. And even like you was talking about in my childhood, when things got hard, it was easy to go with the flow. So I went with the flow and pretended that this big event, this big nomination was just nothing. Yeah. And this is how we lose ourselves. We aren't even aware we're lost.
Right. We're not even aware we've lost ourselves until years later.
Yeah. Another way that I did find myself is, and I was talking about the books, and I hope people do this with podcasts as well, I'm a theory tester, Jen. Mm-hmm. I test. So those books like Shakti Kwan, I tested those as I went along. And if the test didn't work out, which majority of times it did, but if the test didn't work out, I wouldn't follow through with them. There was one called The Dance with Anger. I tested that one. That was brilliant. Taught me so much.
Melody Beattie, right?
Oh, I can't remember the author's name. You look it up. I'll keep going. Shakti Kwan, I tested that. I tested that on the farmhouse, $85,000, 6 months it took me, $85,000 later, exactly how I pictured
Harriet Lerner.
That's it,
Harriet Lerner. Yeah.
Dance of Anger. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. If you've got a manipulating person that you're living with, and remember, emotional abuse can be very, very strong with women because they're good at doing that. Mm-hmm. So it's not just men that do it. So if you're in this emotionally abusive relationship, what happens is that they'll say something to you and you'll respond back, and then they dance you. They take you to where they know that they can press buttons. So when he would come home late from the pub, I'd say, oh, your dinner's there. Oh, I'm not going to have dinner. And then he would change it. And then he would say, yes, but you're not a good mother. Or yes, you don't know how to look after children and you can't even keep the house clean. And he would change it until he found a button to press and I would just, get shitty, get teary, whatever, storm off type thing. I learnt to not do that. And that was what this book did, this Dance with Anger book. So
wow.
He came home one day and he said, look at the dust on the microwave. Okay, right, there's dust on the microwave. So I went and cleaned the dust off. And he kept on going on about the dust on the microwave. Well, there's no dust there. What are we arguing about? Oh, well, because you're not good. You can't keep the house clean. I went, no, you're not. We're not talking about the house clean. We're talking about the dust on the microwave. You came in, you were upset about the dust on the microwave. I've cleaned the dust off on the microwave. And every time he tried to dance me to another spot, I would bring it back to the microwave. And he hated it. But that's what it was about. And this is how I could keep control without him losing it. And it was like, I said, you were angry. You come in, you're angry about dust on the microwave. There's no longer dust on the microwave. You've got to stop being angry now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether I played his game back to him, but I stopped him dancing. I stopped allowing him to take me where he wanted to go. And I kept on bringing it back to what the problem was as he walked in the door. Dust on the microwave. It was dust on the microwave, dust on the microwave. And he had nowhere to go. I stopped dancing.
Yeah. Well, and you stopped being in the defensive mode. You stopped being in the reactive mode. And instead we're like, okay, yeah, here it is. What a miraculous transformation and what an incredible story. I really cannot believe how fast the time is going. And I really want to talk about intuition. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about intuition with you before we come to the top of the hour and everything, because so much of what we're talking about and the importance of stepping away from this before we move to intuition. Is there anything else that feels like really important to be talking about the relationship or the lessons that you've learned from being in the relationship?
The lessons I learned from being, and I will bring it back to intuition, because the lessons I did learn was learning to listen to me, learning to trust me, learning to take on those little messages. And it could be as simple as they've said something and I feel hurt. I can acknowledge that hurt. And I don't have to say that hurt. I just need to acknowledge it in myself to say, okay, that didn't feel right. There's something happening there. Why do I feel that way? And you're starting to acknowledge how you're feeling. And that is where your intuition is coming through. Intuition, and I'll just go into this too very quickly, Jen. I see intuition as the communication between our spiritual side, our soul, that spirit side of us, and our physical side, because the spirit side of us doesn't have access to the five senses of the five physical senses. Spirit doesn't touch and it doesn't taste. So it comes into the body to experience those. There's a couple of my ahas that happened before I left home. I could explain those, but we're running out a little bit of time here. So how I saw that is because of the times that I had left my body. And I was aware that leaving your body, you lose that emotional attachment to the physical side of it. And that's when I went, well, hang on. If spirit doesn't have the ability to touch and taste and hear and things like that, how does it communicate with a body that can? How does it communicate? And that's where the intuitive message, and that's what my passion is about, is listening to those intuitive messages and how we receive them.
Well, and what I'm really hearing in this, and I think this is something so incredibly important, is you first have to know whether you want a jam sandwich or not before you can access the deeper layers of intuition. And one of the things that I've been noticing is the first step to accessing our intuition is even just acknowledging our bodies. Are we constantly ignoring that we have to use the bathroom? Are we constantly holding our bladder and waiting a few more minutes? Are we constantly ignoring that we are hungry, that we are thirsty, that we are cold, or that we are hot? And how do you access the intuition if you don't know what you want to eat? How do you access the intuition if you don't know what you want to wear? How do you access the intuition if you're just constantly trying to tell yourself, like, ignore that you're tired, that ignore that you need to use the bathroom? And I love how, like, we're talking about, it's almost like the precursor to intuition is just even being in touch with what's my desire, like what's going on in here, what really matters.
And a lot of people say, well, what do you like? And when I'm trying to look at clothes, well, what do you like? I don't know what I like.
Yeah.
And then even that is the first step of saying, well, hang on, you don't know what you like. There's something wrong with that. You should know a few things of what you like. You should know that how nice it feels to lay in the sun on a cooler day and how the sun can warm you up. You should know what you like. And so that was one of my aha moments where I went, I need to know more about me. What do I like? And what do I like? And does that make any difference to anyone else's expectation? I can see on you tattoos. Tattoos was one of those things growing up, you don't get a tattoo. You're like this if you've got a tattoo, and then if somebody said to you, okay, if you had a choice to get a tattoo, what would you like to have on you?
Right.
And it's like, oh my God, I don't know.
Yeah.
And this is part of then going, okay, if we want to tap into our intuition, like you said, you've just made an awareness to that you don't know. And you're now making an awareness to say, I do want to know. And you open yourself up and then you go, all right, I'm asking, if I want a tattoo, what would be a good one for me?
Yeah.
Now, you may not get the answer straight away. You may get it when you're in the shower, because often we get it when we're near water. You may get it a couple of days later. You may be scrolling through Facebook and all of a sudden a picture pops up. You go, oh, I really like that. That's connected.
Right.
And then you go, why do I really like that? Oh,
right.
Why that is a tattoo.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you know this, but I was a tattooer. I actually did it professionally. I tattooed other people for over 20 years. And so I spent a lot of time talking with people about what did they want and helping them to find it. And what I discovered also was that very often people got caught up in the details, thinking that they needed to be thinking about the visual image, when the essence of the energy of the tattoo was really what it was about. And once they could articulate what they desired, like what the essence of it was, then the image would sort of fall into place. Whereas when people often would, what image do I want? It was almost like it's not about the image. It's about the energy. It's about the feeling. It's about the intention behind it. And then the image kind of evolves from that. And so that's the other thing, is that I find so often people, and I think this is a metaphor for life, we sometimes will get very, very externally, like the physical detail, thinking that that's what we're trying to figure out, when the truth is it's really more about the intention and the quality and the frequency and the essence of something, as opposed to even the image of, or the physicality of it. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other aspect I look at when I'm doing intuition as well is like I call myself an intuitist. So the mentalist deals with thinking and thoughts, and intuitist deals with feelings and impressions. And that's exactly what you're talking about with a tattoo. It's the feeling that it's giving, the impressions that it's giving, that you want the world to see, that you want the world to know about. And I mean, I don't know, I've just pulled out tattoos from there, but it's anything in life, your clothes, what you're wearing, where you go on holidays, who you're hanging around with, what you're looking at Facebook, what you're liking in your socials, all of that is about the feelings and the impressions.
And being mindful, really being mindful of the feelings and impressions, and in many ways choosing, I think, then making the deliberate choice of like, this feels good, this feels bad. I have a mentor, Joanna Hunter, who's this amazing spiritual teacher and coach out of Scotland. And Joanna talks about finding what you want, that like as adults, we get so invested in the idea of trying to figure it out that we often won't take risks. And she's like, be like a toddler. Like a little kid is just going to grab a box of chocolate and pick the chocolate out of the box and be like, I want this. They taste it. And if they don't love it, the next thing they're doing is looking for the nearest pillow to scrape their tongue with it, because it just isn't what they want. And but there isn't an investment in it. It's sort of like, I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to see if it works. Nope, don't like it. Scrape my tongue. Next, or the half-eaten chocolate where the toddler throws the half-eaten chocolate back into the box. But it's, I think as adults, so often we have these expectations of like, I have to figure out whether I'm going to like it before I even try it. And it's like, no, try it. See if you like it. Like you were saying with the books, where you were like, you had to experiment with it. You had to try it. You had to see, did this land? Yes, it lands. Then you're going to keep going. No, it doesn't land. Next, moving on.
Yeah. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just not right for me.
Right.
Right. And the same with anything we do. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means it may not be right for you. And that's why we have all these modalities. That's why we have all these things that we can do. That's why when you're going through with a coach or a life coach or whatever you're doing there, if that person may resonate with you for a little while, then all of a sudden it doesn't resonate with you. And that's fine because you've learned and you can go ahead. It doesn't mean that person's wrong. It just means that you've changed. The energy's changed.
Well, and you've probably grown in opposite directions because, as you were saying, the thing is we're always evolving and growing. Even your husband was evolving and growing. I mean, or growing, maybe not evolving, but growing, but the thing is, even with coaches, I've absolutely had the experience where I've witnessed from both sides of it, being in the provider side of it and also in the receiver side of it, where it's like we have a contract, we have work to do. And then there's a point where we grow in different directions and that's okay. And, it just is so okay to grow in different directions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I do have to just say this too, probably about, 5 or 6 years after the marriage split up, my ex sent me a book saying, I've just read this book. And he goes, I just thought you would really like it. And it was the Qigong. It was the Qigong the I Ching. Mm-hmm. And he had read it. So yes, he was trying to evolve. Yes, and he was doing it in his own time. So I take my hat off.
Well, and I will just say that alcoholism is a brutal teacher, but it is a teacher. And a lot of times, some of my favorite people on the planet are recovering alcoholics because it is a hard teacher. But when we finally accept the lesson of it, miracles happen. So unless assuming he's still earthside, I hold out prayers for his continued evolution and growth. Yes. So we really are getting to that place where we're really at the top of the hour. And there's a few things I want to ask you. Is there anything else that you are just like, I will kick myself if I don't share this?
Look, I'll just really quickly say the intuitive flowers, because we did mention it. The intuitive flowers is a tool that I created, and it's a tool wholly and solely so you can see your intuitive messages. That's all. Nice. It's just another tool you can use to see your intuitive messages, and that's what I use it for, and that's why I love it.
Wonderful. And the next question I'm going to ask, which if any of my listeners know, we always do this. This is, I believe that podcasts have a way of moving through time. And I believe that while these podcasts exist for, in perpetuity, like these podcasts will be broadcasting and people will be listening to them years and years from now. But I also believe there's a way that those messages kind of have a way of rippling back in time too. And so I love to sending a message back. So if you could imagine that we are sort of folding the fabric of time over on itself, and we are connecting to a time where you needed a message for two things. When are we connecting to? Who are we connecting to? What age, who are you then? And what does she need to hear?
I would be connecting back to when I was a teenager, and my message to her would be, this too shall pass. And it was something that I learned later on in life. We get caught up in the emotion and everything that's going on, that we feel that there's no way out, and we get very, very stagnant, very, very boxed in, and we feel like we're stuck there. I just want to let her know that this too shall pass. You'll get through this. You'll get through this. Just allow it to go.
This too shall pass. You'll get through this. What a wonderful message. And so the final question that I have for you, Susan, is how can people get in touch?
On my website, intuitivenature.com.au, it's an Australian business. We have to have the AU at the end.
Yeah.
They can connect me through that way. I have a podcast as well called The Voice of Intuition.
Yes, you do, which is how you and I connected in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And you also have a really active TikTok page or TikTok profile where you talk about flowers like I'm seeing posts from you nearly every single day. Where you're
day
also,
you will get a daily reading, a daily flower reading. Yes. Every day on TikTok. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And your handle on a TikTok is at Intuitive Nature.
Yes. Your Intuitive Nature. I'm sure it's Intuitive Nature.
Let me pull you up on TikTok just to be sure.
Oh, when you're adding it to different social medias and sometimes you can't get exactly what you want.
Oh, I know. Yes. I was really lucky in pretty much everything or almost everything I've got on social is all at Empathic Mastery. But it is a process for sure.
Yeah. I had some that had to be, I think, Twitter is Your Intuitive Nature. And then some of them are under Susan Jane the Intuitive. So
so you are on TikTok. You are Intuitive Nature. So just pure intuitive nature. Yeah. And today, at least what I'm seeing is a viola. It looks like is the flower, which is just,
so you'll get one every day. And you get a little, just a daily reading just to sort of go, oh, wow, this is what the flowers are about. But like I said, the flowers show you those different things, show you those messages.
They really do. And I was showing you all of the flowers I have surrounding me right now because today's been a very big flower day. Susan, this conversation has just been so rich, so powerful, and so important. And I hope for any person who is listening to this and doesn't know who they are, is maybe doubting themselves, or is really just still stuck in a partner, in a relationship or a situation where they're just having to go along with it. I really hope that this has given them a sense of hope and a sense of inspiration about what is possible. And I guess I'll ask you actually one last question, which is if you had any advice for people who are at the place that you were, like maybe 30 years ago, like, where you were just starting to be like, this is not really working for me anymore. What advice would you give to somebody who's realizing that it's not working? Yeah. What would you suggest?
I would suggest, and mainly because of the way the world is today, I would suggest that you start to follow different people. Please, please, please do not stick with one person. Get what you need out of that person. I remember with the books, there was things in the books that I would go, nah, don't listen, I don't like that. And then there was other parts that I would take on, and I would be able to change, and I would test them, make sure they resonated with me, and moved forward. I would ask everyone to do that. This is how you are trusting your intuition, is by understanding that if that resonates with me, I'm going to follow that a little bit longer and see where that goes. If what the person down the road resonates with me, I'll follow that and see how that goes. But if that person next door says, you should be doing this, and that doesn't resonate with me, let it go. Mm-hmm. Don't follow things that are not resonating with you. Be open.
Don't follow. Let me just repeat that. Don't follow things that are not resonating with you.
Yes.
Just pure wisdom there. And sadly, it's sort of like of course, but we live in a culture that so often we are so pressured to go along and to try to make ourselves like things because other people do. Don't follow things that don't resonate with you. Susan,
especially with the social media, because it's like, oh, I want to be like them. Well, hang on. Do they resonate with you? Yeah.
Right. Does it resonate? And that really is it's like resonance is the first step to intuition. Susan, thank you so much for being here today. This conversation has just been so rich.
Thank you for having me. I loved it. Thank you so much.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm, and While you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your empathic safety guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.